They laughed when I forgot my own garage code. It wasn't cruel, not in the way a stranger mocks you, but there was something dismissive in their chuckles, as if a six-digit number meant I was fading. I remember standing there in the cold Michigan air, pressing the keypad twice, then pulling back my hand, the way you do when a machine refuses to listen. Their laughter lingered longer than the winter wind. That was the injustice, the sting sharper than the frost. Before I go further, if you've ever been underestimated like that, brushed aside by the very people you love, stay with me. These are the moments we carry in silence. If my story rings familiar, I'd be grateful if you could tap like below, subscribe for more, and even share in the comments when you last felt invisible. Those stories matter. The garage code is a small thing, I know, but small things stack up. A misplaced wallet, a name lost on the tip of the tongue, a pan left warming too long. Each slip became a story my children quietly traded with one another. They didn't mean harm, yet harm came anyway. I wasn't always this man they pitied. For 30 years I managed insurance claims, sorting through accidents, break-ins, fires. My job was to catch what didn't add up. People relied on my memory. Back then, I could recall VIN numbers, serial codes, dates of loss, details that saved families from ruin. Now, if I forget my keys, it seems to erase all that. That evening after the garage code mishap, we gathered around my kitchen table. Roast chicken filled the air, my daughter poured wine. Conversation should have been easy, but I felt eyes scanning me, as if I were a test no one believed I'd pass. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, leaned in too often, repeating her words slowly, as though volume could rescue me from confusion. "Are you sure you paid the electric bill, Dad?" she asked once, voice soft but the doubt sharp. I had paid it, of course. The receipt still sat in the junk drawer under rubber bands and expired coupons. Yet the question wasn't really about the bill, it was about me. Was I still capable, reliable, worthy of being the pillar I had been? I smiled, nodded, even cracked a joke to ease the tension. But inside, something unsettled shifted. Later, when the house grew quiet, I walked the hallway lined with framed photographs. Each picture carried proof of the man I'd been. A father coaching Little League. A husband holding hands with his wife on Mackinac Island. A worker receiving an award for 20 years of service. The walls whispered, "You have not vanished." Still, doubt creeps in at night. I sat at my desk with a yellow pad, writing down the date, the time, the grocery list. I read it back twice, committing it to memory. I wasn't testing myself for dementia. I was testing myself against their doubt. The pad became my shield, proof that I could still hold on. The twist came unexpectedly. My grandson, Ethan, stopped by with a grin and asked if I remembered the song I used to hum when fixing the lawnmower. I hummed a few bars, off-key but recognizable. He clapped, triumphant. "See, you still got it, Grandpa." That small victory felt larger than any award. It wasn't just memory, it was dignity reclaimed. But the reprieve didn't last. While Ethan scrolled through his phone, I overheard Sarah's voice from the living room. She thought she was alone. Her words floated clear in the quiet house. "He's slipping. Sooner or later we'll need to help him adjust his affairs." Adjust, such a gentle word for something sharp. The air turned heavy. I stood frozen, pen in hand, heartbeat loud enough to drown out reason. My affairs, my life. My years of labor compressed into a phrase whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. I didn't confront her, not then. Instead, I returned to my desk, pressed my palm flat on the yellow pad, and forced myself to steady. The fight ahead would not be about memory alone. It would be about trust, about whether age stripped away not only our sharpness but also our voice. That night, as the furnace kicked on and the house settled, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "You are not gone." The words felt like a promise, not just to me but to the life I had built, to the family I still hoped to guide. And yet, somewhere in that same house, a different promise was taking shape. One that would test everything I believed about loyalty, family, and the fragile weight of memory. The chicken had barely touched our plates when the questions began. Families are supposed to speak of the weather, the children's grades, the price of gas. But that evening, every forkful seemed heavy with something unsaid. I watched the steam rise from the platter, curling upward like smoke signals no one dared interpret. My daughter, Claire, poured a glass of Merlot for her husband, then glanced my way as if preparing to recite lines from a play. She was careful, choosing words that wouldn't offend, yet each syllable felt rehearsed. "Dad," she began, "you've always been so careful with money." Careful, a compliment on the surface, but beneath an implication: was I still careful or merely clutching at the past? Her husband, Mark, leaned in with the practiced ease of a man who made his living convincing clients to sign dotted lines. He had the salesman's smile, generous but calculated. "We just want to make sure everything's, secure. These days identity theft is everywhere." His tone was casual, but his eyes stayed fixed on me, measuring. I set down my fork, listening. Secure, identity theft, such modern words. When I was young, theft meant a broken window, muddy footprints across the living room carpet. Now it meant screens and passwords and invisible hands reaching into your accounts. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice calm, "everything is in order." Yet the conversation didn't end. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, folded her napkin with slow precision, then asked, "Do you have someone like an attorney who helps you with all that paperwork?" Her tone was sugar, but the question clanged like a warning bell. I remember the way the silverware clinked against porcelain, a sound usually lost in the hum of conversation. That night it was all I heard, metal striking ceramic, the small percussion of unease. "Your father has always managed fine," Claire said quickly, rushing to soften the edge. She meant to defend me, I know, but her voice carried a tremor, as if even she was not entirely certain. Mark carved into his chicken, nodding sympathetically. "It's just that sometimes things slip through the cracks. None of us are immune." The word slip struck me like a draft from a cracked window. It was the same word whispered earlier in the hallway, the one Sarah had chosen when she thought I couldn't hear. "He's slipping." I studied their faces in the warm light above the table. Claire's brows knit together with worry. Mark's eyes sharp, like a man reviewing fine print. Sarah's lips pursed in polite concern, her glance darting toward the folder on my sideboard where I kept unpaid bills. My appetite vanished. I pushed food around my plate to keep appearances. The injustice wasn't in their words, but in their assumptions. That age had turned me from father into liability, from caretaker into burden. Ethan, my grandson, broke the tension without realizing. He tapped his spoon against his glass and laughed about a story from school, something about a science experiment gone wrong. For a moment, the room softened. We all smiled, grateful for the distraction. But when the laughter faded, silence returned, thicker than before. I excused myself to fetch more bread from the kitchen. The overhead light hummed faintly, the kind of sound you notice only when you are desperate for any noise other than the weight of your thoughts. From the dining room, I heard Sarah's voice again, hushed but not hushed enough. "If we don't guide him now, it could get messy later." Later, messy. The words stacked on top of one another, bricks building a wall I hadn't agreed to. I steadied the breadbasket in my hands, forced a smile as I returned to the table. We ate the rest of the meal as though nothing had been spoken. Stories about neighborhood construction, the rising cost of groceries, the book Claire had half finished. Yet each normal detail felt staged, like wallpaper covering cracks in the wall. When the plates were cleared, I lingered in the kitchen, rinsing dishes beneath warm water, the rhythm grounding me. My family's voices carried faintly from the other room. I caught fragments, attorney documents, someday soon. I dried my hands slowly, as though the towel could erase not just water but the gnawing sense of betrayal. That night, as I turned down the bed, I repeated the small ritual that had become my anchor. I wrote the date and time on a slip of paper, placed it on the nightstand. Evidence, if only for myself, proof that memory still lived here. Yet sleep would not come. The words at dinner clung to me: secure, slip, messy. At one point I rose and walked the hallway again, pausing beneath the framed photographs. I lingered at one, my wedding day, my late wife smiling in the summer sun, her eyes bright with trust. I whispered to her picture, "They think I've forgotten who I am." But I hadn't, not yet. It was the small dismissals that stung most. Not the shouting of strangers or the insults of enemies, but the quiet corrections of your own blood. The morning after that uneasy dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper folded open. I circled the crossword in ink, something I'd done for decades, the ritual that made me feel steady. A half-completed puzzle sat before me, the kind where the clues tied back to history and old films, my strong suit. Claire entered, still in her robe, sipping coffee. She leaned over my shoulder and glanced at the page. "You should try pencil, Dad," she said softly. "Easier to erase when you get stuck." When you get stuck. As though the ink was a gamble I couldn't afford anymore. I smiled to keep the peace, but my pen pressed harder into the page. Later, while I rummaged in the pantry, Mark called out, "Don't forget your blood pressure pills today." His tone was light, almost cheerful, but it carried the weight of an instruction rather than a reminder. "I never forget," I replied. From the living room came his chuckle. "Sure, Dad, that's what you said about the garage code." The words slid under my skin like splinters. One mistake, and suddenly my entire life became a punchline. Sarah joined soon after, setting her phone on the counter as she chopped vegetables. She spoke without looking up. "Claire told me you left the porch light on all night again. You need me to handle those switches for you." The suggestion was wrapped in kindness, but the implication was clear. You can't manage even the lights. I reached for the knife block, gripped the handle of a paring knife, then set it down deliberately. "I can handle my own switches," I said. My voice was steady, but I could feel my pulse quicken. The day wore on with these little jabs, each one disguised as care. By the afternoon, I was worn thin. I stepped onto the porch, craving air colder than their words. The maple tree out front had begun to shed its leaves, red and gold tumbling across the lawn. Autumn was always my wife's season. She loved the crispness, the way the air smelled of wood smoke. I closed my eyes, let the breeze remind me of her steadiness. That evening we gathered again for supper. I offered to cook spaghetti, simple enough. As I boiled the noodles, I heard them whispering in the dining room. My name floated between them. "Caught in the draft. He just doesn't realize slipping. What if he forgets where the—" Rest blurred, muffled by the clatter of the pot lid. I gripped the counter edge, fighting the urge to storm in. Instead, I stayed quiet, stirring sauce, letting the simmering bubbles mask the storm inside me. During dinner, Ethan asked me about a baseball game we had watched years ago. Without pause, I recited the final score, the name of the pitcher, even the inning when the winning run came home. His face lit with admiration. "Grandpa remembers better than I do," he said. The table grew quiet for a moment. Claire smiled faintly, but Sarah's eyes narrowed, calculating. Mark changed the subject quickly, steering conversation away from my small victory. That was the minute twist of the evening, proof, however fleeting, that my mind was not gone, but instead of relief I felt their discomfort. My clarity unsettled them. After dinner, as I carried plates to the sink, Claire reached for the stack in my hands. "Careful, Dad. Those are heavy." The plates weighed less than my wife's cast-iron skillet, which I had carried daily for decades. Yet the concern in her voice reduced me once again to fragile porcelain. I washed each dish slowly, methodically, letting the warm water calm me. Behind me, their conversation continued in low tones. My name again. My future again. That night, I sat alone in my study, flipping through old photo albums. My wife's smile beamed back from the pages, a reminder of who I was before the whispers. I jotted notes in my yellow pad, dates, bills paid, groceries purchased. My evidence, my defense against their narrative. But as I wrote, one thought refused to fade. They want me to believe I am slipping so they can take control before I notice. I tapped the pen against the pad, staring at the ceiling. It was nearly midnight when I noticed the blue ring glowing in the dark. The house had long gone quiet. Claire and Mark were upstairs, their laughter muffled behind a closed door. Sarah had retreated early, saying she had emails to finish. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch with a video game controller still in his hand. I sat alone in the living room, a half-finished cup of tea cooling beside me. That's when I saw it. the faint circle of light on the little speaker by the bookshelf. Alexa listening. I'd bought the device years ago at Claire's suggestion. "It'll make things easier, Dad," she'd said. "Easier to play music, easier to set reminders." I had agreed reluctantly because resisting her felt like refusing kindness. Over time, I grew used to it. "Alexa, play Sinatra," or "Alexa, set a timer for the oven." Simple conveniences, but tonight the glowing light felt like an eye watching, not a helper serving. I leaned back, hearing the furnace kick on, a low hum filling the silence. The thought came quietly at first, then louder. If Alexa could hear me, what else had it heard? I remembered Sarah's voice drifting down the hall the other night, her words slipping, affairs messy later. I wondered if this plastic cylinder had caught them, stored them in some cloud where memory never fades. Curiosity got the better of me. I whispered, "Alexa, what did you hear earlier?" The device chimed, polite and blank. "Sorry, I'm not sure about that." I chuckled, shaking my head at my own foolishness, talking to a machine in the dark as if it were a trusted witness. And yet when I picked up my tea, I noticed something, an option in the companion app on my phone, history. I tapped it, scrolling. A list of recent commands appeared, some from me, others from voices not mine. "Alexa, turn on the porch light." "Alexa, add milk to the shopping list." Familiar, innocent, but then one line stopped me. "Alexa, remind me to call the attorney tomorrow at 9 a.m. I had never asked that. My hand tightened around the phone. The timestamp placed it during the afternoon while I had been out raking leaves. Who had spoken? The room seemed smaller suddenly, the shadows deeper. I looked at the speaker again, the blue ring pulsing faintly as though it too remembered something it shouldn't. Ethan stirred on the couch, mumbling in his sleep. I draped a blanket over him, then returned to my chair. My mind raced back through every small dismissal, every whispered word. They thought my memory failed me. But what if I had a memory bigger than mine, stored in circuits, retrievable at will? A strange comfort settled over me. I wasn't alone. The house itself had been listening. I tested further. "Alexa, replay my last reminder." The speaker chimed again. A recording played in Sarah's voice, crisp and clear. "Call the attorney tomorrow at 9 a.m. I froze. There it was. Not my imagination, not a slip of my memory. Her voice, captured in a machine she assumed was only convenient. The twist hit me harder than I expected. My greatest weakness, the perception that I forgot, was now paired with a silent witness that forgot nothing. I saved the clip quickly, fumbling with the app until I figured out how to email it to myself. My hands shook, not from fear but from adrenaline, the way they used to when I closed a complicated case at work. Evidence, that was the word. For years I'd built cases on scraps of receipts, insurance forms, surveillance footage. Tonight my case began with a plastic cylinder glowing blue. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the street lamps cast long shadows over the quiet neighborhood. The autumn wind rattled the branches, scattering leaves across the driveway. I thought of my wife again, her faith in my steadiness. "Don't let them take that from you," her memory seemed to whisper. By dawn, the tea had grown cold, but my resolve had warmed. They might believe I was slipping, but this house had been listening all along. It was the quiet that betrayed them. Houses have rhythms, doors opening, chairs scraping, laughter spilling down hallways. But that evening, after the dinner dishes were stacked in the sink, the rhythm shifted. Claire had gone upstairs to help Ethan with his homework. Mark excused himself to take a phone call in the driveway. That left Sarah in the living room, her voice carrying in the unnatural silence. I was in the hallway, halfway to the kitchen, when I heard it. We'll need it adjusted before he forgets completely." The words floated like smoke, faint but unmistakable. My hand froze on the banister. I pressed my back against the wall, hardly breathing. Sarah's voice lowered, softer, as if secrecy could shield her. "No, he won't notice. He trusts me. All I need is a signature." The signature. My heart thudded louder than her whisper. I thought of the yellow pad on my desk, filled with dates and receipts, my desperate attempt to prove I was still sound. And yet here was the woman who married into my family, speaking of me as if I were already diminished, already defeated. I edged closer, careful to keep the floorboards from groaning. Through the sliver of the doorway I saw her seated on the sofa, phone pressed to her ear, fingers twisting the hem of her blouse. Her words came clipped, calculated. Yes, forged if it comes to that, but better if he signs. Easier to explain. Forged. The syllables landed like stones in my stomach. For years I had handled insurance claims, spotting lies tucked into neat paperwork. I had seen the greed of neighbors suing neighbors, cousins fighting over burnt houses, but hearing it here in my own living room was different. This wasn't a stranger's fraud. This was betrayal wearing a familiar face. A part of me wanted to storm in, to demand answers, to seize the phone from her hand and expose the truth. But another part, the investigator in me, knew patience was a sharper weapon. Evidence mattered more than anger. So I slipped quietly back toward the kitchen, let the faucet run to mask any sound, and stood staring at the stream of water. My reflection wavered in the metal sink. I hardly recognized the man who looked back, tired eyes, lips pressed tight. Yet inside, a flame burned steadier than it had in months. When Sarah ended her call, she appeared in the doorway, startled to see me rinsing a mug. "Everything all right, Dad?" she asked sweetly, her tone sugar after the poison I'd just heard. I dried the mug slowly. "Everything's fine." Her smile lingered a second too long, then she turned away. That night I couldn't shake her words, forged if it comes to that. I sat at my desk, the yellow pad open, pen poised above the paper. For years I had trusted memory alone. Now memory would not be enough. I needed proof beyond myself, something undeniable. The speaker by the bookshelf glowed faintly, as though reminding me of its secret. Alexa had captured her once. Perhaps it could do so again. I imagined Sarah's confidence, the way she must believe her whispers dissolved into the air. She didn't know the house itself had ears. She didn't know her words could echo back, sharp as daggers. The minute twist settled in. My weakness, the failing memory they mocked, had become my cover. She underestimated me, and that underestimation might be her undoing. I rose and walked the hallway, my steps careful, deliberate. The photographs stared back at me, my wedding day, my children's graduations, birthdays marked with cake and candles. These walls had held joy for decades. Now they held secrets too. I paused at Ethan's door. He was asleep, his lamp still on, books scattered across the floor. His trust was pure, untouched by greed. I whispered silently, a promise only the night could hear. "I will protect this home, even if it means protecting it from my own family." I returned to my bed, but sleep was impossible. I lay listening to the faint creaks of the house, the murmur of wind outside, the throb of my own pulse. By morning I decided the only way to fight their doubts was with proof not only for them but for myself. I've always been a man of lists. Grocery lists claim numbers, appointments written in neat block letters. They grounded me, tethered me to a sense of order. Now they would become my armor. At the kitchen table I opened my yellow pad. Across the top I wrote the date in bold strokes, October 14. Beneath it, I wrote the time, 7:05 a.m., and then a list of tasks I had already completed: brewed coffee, took my medication, folded the laundry. Each entry was a stone in a wall I was building against their whispers. Claire walked in while I was writing. She glanced at the page, then at me, a faint crease forming on her forehead. "What's all this, Dad?" she asked, reaching for the coffee pot. "Just keeping track," I replied, my tone deliberately casual. "Helps me stay sharp." She smiled the way you do when humoring a child's drawing. "That's good," she said softly, pouring her cup. "It'll help if you forget." Forget. The word lingered in the air like smoke. I watched her retreat toward the hallway, coffee in hand, and I felt the pad grow heavier beneath my palm. By midday I tested myself further. I wrote down names of neighbors, phone numbers I had known for years, the model of my first car. Each fact arrived steady, each memory sharp. When I read them aloud I felt stronger, as though I was reclaiming ground that had been quietly stolen. But memory is a tricky companion. Just when you trust it, it can slip through your fingers. As I reached for another page I faltered on something simple, my bank's routing number. I knew I had written it dozens of times, but in that moment it vanished. My chest tightened. The panic was brief but cutting. What if they were right? What if the slips weren't imagined but real? I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the memory return at its own pace. When it finally surfaced, steady and clear, relief washed over me. I wrote it down twice, underlining it as though to anchor it in place. That evening the testing grew more deliberate. I placed sticky notes around the house, on the refrigerator, on the bathroom mirror, near the light switch by the back door. Each one bore small reminders. Lock the porch door at 9 p.m. / check stove before bed. I wasn't leaving instructions for myself. I was leaving evidence. If anyone accused me of neglect, I would point to the notes, to the system I had built. A man slipping away doesn't create his own safeguards. A man slipping away doesn't prepare a defense. Mark noticed one of the notes as he headed to the garage. "You sure you're okay, Dad?" he asked, half grinning. "Looks like you're turning the place into a post-it museum." His laugh was light, but his eyes studied me carefully. I smiled back. Better too many reminders than none at all. He shrugged, pocketing his car keys, and disappeared into the garage. The laugh lingered longer than the conversation. That night I sat again by the blue glow of Alexa. I scrolled through the app, listening to fragments of recordings, snippets of voices. Most were harmless, requests for music, reminders about groceries. But then I stumbled upon another voice command, this one from Sarah. "Alexa, remind me to print copies of the legal papers." The timestamp matched an afternoon when I had been outside trimming hedges. My hand trembled slightly on the phone. She wasn't planning, she was preparing. The minute twist hit hard. Not only was Sarah whispering about my will, she was already moving forward step by step. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the device. It had become more than a convenience. It was a silent witness, recording their confidence, their schemes, their missteps. And now it was my ally. I closed the yellow pad, slid it into my desk drawer, and whispered a quiet prayer to the woman whose picture still sat on my bookshelf. "Help me hold on. Help me prove I am not finished yet." The first hint came over breakfast. The kitchen smelled of toasted bread and fresh coffee. I was buttering a slice, enjoying the small rhythm of the morning, when Mark slid into the chair across from me. He stirred sugar into his cup with unusual care, as though rehearsing a conversation. "Dad," he said finally, his tone polite but rehearsed, "have you ever thought about updating your paperwork? You know, just to make things simpler for everyone." Paperwork. The word carried weight heavier than the coffee mug in my hand. I set the knife down slowly. "My paperwork is in order." He nodded too quickly, his smile tight. "Of course, I just meant circumstances change. Wouldn't want anyone to be caught off guard." His phrasing was smooth, but the meaning clanged loudly. Circumstances change, caught off guard. He wasn't asking about my comfort. He was asking about my will. Claire entered, tying her robe, unaware of the tension. "What are you two talking about?" Mark glanced at her, then back at me. "Just future planning, nothing urgent." She smiled faintly. "It's not a bad idea, Dad. We'd all feel better knowing everything's settled." The word struck like a gentle hammer. She didn't mean harm, I knew, but her agreement wrapped Mark's pressure in the soft blanket of concern. I forced a smile, sipped my coffee, and let the subject drift. But inside, my chest tightened. They weren't hinting anymore, they were circling. Later that day, Claire suggested we all drive out to the park. The trees were aflame with color, the air sharp with autumn. We walked along the path while Ethan kicked leaves into the air. It should have been peaceful, yet even there the subject returned. Mark lagged behind with me, lowering his voice so Claire wouldn't hear. "Lawyers say it's best to get signatures early. You never know when memory might fade." Fade. The word echoed louder than the crunch of leaves underfoot. I stopped walking, letting the breeze sting my face. "My memory is fine." He chuckled lightly, as if I were overreacting. "Of course, Dad, I didn't mean anything by it, just trying to help." But his eyes gave him away, sharp, appraising, waiting for cracks. That evening, Sarah placed a folder on the dining table. She claimed it was just some insurance forms, but I noticed the way her fingers lingered on the cover. the way her gaze flicked toward me. "I'll need your signature later," she said smoothly, before sweeping the folder aside when Ethan ran in. The folder remained all night, untouched yet loud, its presence like a shadow cast across the table. When they finally went upstairs, I sat alone in the dim light, staring at the folder. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my yellow pad and wrote the date, the time, and a single line: "They are pressing now." Minute twist came the next morning. As I scrolled through the Alexa history, I found a new entry: "Remind me to print 2 copies of the will draft." The voice was Sarah's, recorded clear as daylight. My chest burned. Not only were they pushing, they already had drafts. I saved the clip quickly, emailing it to myself as I had before. My collection of evidence was growing, not of my decline, but of their intent. That afternoon, Claire brought tea to my study. She smiled warmly, but her words carried the same undercurrent. "Dad, maybe tomorrow you could sit with Mark just to review a few documents, nothing serious." I held her hand gently, feeling the softness of my daughter's palm, the same hand I'd held when teaching her to cross the street years ago. "We'll see," I said, steady but firm. She nodded, perhaps relieved, perhaps fooled. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the war had shifted. Before, it was whispers in hallways, questions dressed as concern. Now it was paperwork, folders, drafts. They had moved from suspicion to action. The folder sat on the dining table for 2 days, as silent as a loaded gun. No one mentioned it directly, though Sarah often brushed her hand across the cover when she passed, as if checking that it was still there. Mark left his briefcase beside it, almost guarding the thing without words. Claire said nothing at all, her silence more troubling than questions. I told myself not to touch it. Evidence came best when revealed in its own time. But temptation grew heavier each hour, until the folder no longer seemed paper and ink but a beating heart, daring me to expose it. On the second night, after the house had settled and their bedroom doors clicked shut, I moved. I carried the folder into my study, shutting the door behind me with a care I had not used since handling confidential files in my working days. The desk lamp cast a circle of yellow light, and within that circle the truth waited. The first page was harmless, an insurance renewal. The second, 2 utilities. But then the third slipped like a knife: last will and testament draft. My name at the top, my children's names below. My breath caught. The draft was clean, professional, undoubtedly drawn by an attorney. Assets divided, responsibilities outlined, yet lines had been rearranged. Places where I had once written specific instructions for donations, my wife's church, the library fund, were absent. Instead, the language funneled everything into the hands of Claire and her husband, with Sarah as a witness. I flipped pages with trembling fingers, anger rising with each paragraph. My life's work, the home I had built brick by brick, the savings scraped together over decades, reshaped without my voice. One phrase stuck like tar: "In the event of diminished capacity, the family may assume stewardship." Diminished capacity. Those words cut deeper than any betrayal. For a moment, I felt dizzy, the room spinning. What if the slips I feared, the garage code, the forgotten routing number, became their justification? What if every small stumble was gathered, catalogued, wielded against me like a weapon? I steadied myself against the desk, breathing slow until the anger sharpened into clarity. This was not my will, this was theirs. I slid the pages back carefully, aligning corners so no crease betrayed my search. Then I noticed something: a sticky note at the back, written in Sarah's neat script. "Dad signs this week, push gently." The minute twist snapped into place. Not only were they preparing, they had a timeline. I tucked the folder back into its cover, returned it quietly to the table, and retreated to my room. Lying awake, I stared at the ceiling. A memory surfaced. Years ago, as an investigator, I had caught a man trying to stage an accident. He'd scattered broken glass on the road, hoping to claim damages. But one shard reflected too brightly under the morning sun, betraying the lie. The folder was that shard, a glittering fragment of a plan too carefully staged. And now I had seen it. I reached for my yellow pad, wrote the date, and underlined 3 words: "They are ready." Beside it, I scribbled another note: Check Alexa history tomorrow. If the house had recorded Sarah once, perhaps it had caught more. Perhaps the device had stored the very conversations that gave birth to this draft. I closed the pad, slid it into the drawer, and finally lay down. Sleep did not come, but determination did. Morning light streamed through the curtains, golden and thin, but it could not soften what I had seen the night before. The folder lay where I had returned it, still quiet, still waiting. Only I knew the poison inside. I poured coffee, hands steady, and opened my yellow pad. Across the top of the page I wrote in large letters, "Evidence." Beneath it I listed each clue I had collected. Sarah's whisper about the will, and forged if it comes to that. Alexa's recording, call the attorney at 9 a.m. The sticky note, Dad signs this week, pushed gently. The draft will itself, altered, stripped of my wishes. Each entry was a brick in a wall I was building, not against time, but against betrayal. When the house emptied, Mark off on errands, Claire driving Ethan to school, Sarah busy upstairs, I returned to the Alexa app. Scrolling through the history, I listened to fragments. Claire asking for music, Ethan requesting weather updates. Harmless. Then Sarah's voice again. Alexa, remind me to bring the notary Friday morning. My heart jolted. Friday. A date now attached to their plan. I saved the clip, emailing it to myself. Evidence layered and undeniable. By noon I had gathered more. Bank statements piled on the counter, some unopened, redirected to my address without my permission. Letters with Mark's name scribbled on the envelopes, a draft of power of attorney tucked between bills as though hiding in plain sight. Each discovery added weight, yet also clarity. They believed my memory weak, but memory was no longer my only defense. Paper trails, recordings, written notes, they would speak when my voice was dismissed. Minute twist came in the form of Ethan. He bounded in from school, backpack half open, papers spilling out. As I helped him gather them, a page caught my eye. It was a family tree assignment. Across the top he had written, "Grandpa is the head of the family." I stared at those words longer than I should have. To him I wasn't slipping. To him I was still the anchor. That scrap of homework became my quiet fuel. That evening I tested a theory. At dinner, I deliberately misquoted a baseball score from last season. Mark corrected me instantly, smiling too broadly. Claire looked worried. Then I calmly recited the entire box score from the actual game, inning by inning, down to the pitcher's ERA. Silence fell. Sarah broke it with a laugh, forced and brittle. "Well, you remember the strangest things." But in her eyes I saw unease. My little performance had unsettled the script they were writing about me. Later I returned to my study, locked the door, and spread everything out. The yellow pad, the printed Alexa transcripts I had emailed to myself, copies of the altered will I had discreetly photographed with my phone. It looked less like a desk and more like a case file, one of the many I had assembled years ago. Except this time the suspects bore my own last name. As the house settled for the night, I made one last note. They believe I am weak. Let them. Because weakness, performed at the right moment, could become the sharpest weapon. Friday arrived with a crispness in the air, the kind of autumn morning that usually carried nothing more than the smell of wood smoke and fallen leaves. But in my house it carried tension. I had overheard Sarah's reminder to Alexa, "Bring the notary Friday morning." The words had settled into my bones like frost. This wasn't speculation anymore. Today they would try to make it official. At breakfast, Mark was unusually cheerful. He buttered toast, whistled a tune, and kept glancing at his watch. Claire sat beside him, quieter, stirring her coffee too long, as though the spoon might answer questions she dared not voice. Sarah floated through the kitchen with her usual efficiency, phone in hand, eyes sharp. When she caught me watching, her smile widened. "Big day, Dad," she said lightly. "We'll take care of some paperwork later, nothing for you to worry about." Her tone was gentle, but beneath it the push was obvious. "Today you sign." I pretended confusion, tilting my head slightly. "Paperwork? What paperwork?" Mark chuckled. "Just routine stuff, house insurance, a few signatures, easy." I nodded, feigning slow acceptance. "All right if you say so." Inside, my mind was racing. I wasn't just resisting anymore, I was setting the stage. After breakfast, I retreated to my study, closing the door quietly. On my desk, the evidence lay waiting. Alexa transcripts, photographs of the altered will, my yellow pad filled with dates and details. I slid everything into a folder marked private. Then I pulled out a small device I had purchased earlier in the week, a compact voice recorder. Years of handling claims had taught me one truth: memory could be doubted, but recordings rarely were. I clipped the device to the inside of my shirt pocket, hidden but ready. By mid-morning, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a man in a gray suit, briefcase in hand, the notary. My chest tightened, not with fear but with the weight of the moment. This was the crossroads, the line they believed I would cross without resistance. Mark greeted him warmly, ushering him inside. "Dad's in the study," he said. "We'll bring the papers in just a moment." I sat in my chair, posture deliberately slouched, expression tired. If they expected frailty, I would give them frailty. Sarah entered first, folder in hand. "Here we are," she said, laying it on the desk. Her voice was sugar, but her eyes gleamed. Mark followed with the notary, who smiled politely, unaware of the storm beneath the surface. "Just a few signatures, Mr. Lawson," he said. "Shouldn't take long." Claire lingered by the door, her face pale. I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. She hadn't known the extent. I opened the folder slowly, letting my hands tremble as though uncertain. The pages stared back, filled with neat legal language: the altered will. My name at the top, their names beneath. Sarah leaned closer, pointing to the line. "Right there, Dad, just sign where it's marked." Her finger tapped the spot like a hammer striking metal. The minute twist came not from me, but from Claire. "Wait," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. All eyes turned to her. She swallowed hard. "I thought this was just insurance paperwork. Why does it say last will and testament?" Mark's smile faltered. "It's just formality, honey, nothing serious." But her eyes stayed fixed on me, wide and uncertain. In that moment, I realized Claire wasn't fully part of the plan. She was being carried along by their momentum, persuaded by concern. Her hesitation was the crack in their wall. I met her gaze, steadying my voice. "Claire, do you believe I need this now?" The room froze. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her silence louder than words. Mark stepped in quickly. "Dad, it's just easier for everyone. Best to be prepared." But I lifted the pen slowly, letting them believe I was about to comply. Inside my pocket, the recorder blinked red. Every word, every push was being preserved. I set the pen down deliberately, not signing. "Let me think a little longer," I murmured, feigning weariness. Sarah forced a smile, though her jaw tightened. "Of course, Dad, take your time." But her eyes betrayed frustration. Their plan was not complete, not yet. That night, when the house grew quiet again, I replayed the recording on my phone. Their voices filled the room. The push, the pressure, the cracks in their story. Evidence. The notary's visit had left more behind than unsigned papers. It left silence, thick, unsettled silence that clung to the house like fog. That evening, Claire avoided Mark's eyes. She moved about the kitchen with mechanical precision, drying dishes that were already dry, stacking cups twice before placing them back in the cabinet. I watched her, and I could see it. Doubt had cracked her certainty. Later, when Mark stepped out to the garage for a call, I found her alone at the sink. "Claire," I said softly, careful not to startle her, "do you believe I needed that will changed?" She froze, her hand lingering on a dish towel. For a long moment she didn't speak. Finally, her shoulders sagged. "I don't know," she whispered. "Mark said it was just precaution, but seeing the words, Dad, it didn't feel right." Her voice broke slightly, like a rope fraying under strain. I placed my hand gently over hers. "I've made mistakes, forgotten things, yes, but I am not gone." She nodded, tears threatening but not falling. That was enough for now. When Mark re-entered, Claire dried her face quickly. He glanced between us, suspicion flickering across his features. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," Claire said too quickly, but her tone betrayed her. He knew, and I knew he knew. That night I heard their argument through the thin walls. Claire's voice, sharp with emotion. "You didn't tell me it was the will." Mark's reply, low and defensive, "It's for his own good." Her retort trembling but strong, "Or for yours." The words cut the air. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, letting the sound fuel my resolve. Minute twist came the next morning at breakfast. Claire placed my coffee in front of me, her eyes meeting mine with quiet defiance. Then she turned to Mark. "If this is about protecting Dad, then we'll wait. No more rushing. He decides when he's ready." Mark's jaw tightened. He didn't argue, not in front of me, but the silence between them was heavier than any words. Sarah broke it with a brittle laugh. "Well, that's settled then. We'll just wait." But her eyes, cold and calculating, told me she was not finished. I knew then the family was splitting down invisible lines. Mark and Sarah pressed forward, but Claire hesitated, pulled between loyalty to her husband and trust in her father. That hesitation was my foothold. I began to lean into it. During the day, I asked Claire to walk with me around the block. We spoke of simple things: the maple trees shedding their leaves, Ethan's school projects, memories of her mother. Each word was a reminder. I was still her father, still capable, still worth listening to. She didn't say much, but her hand slipped into mine halfway through the walk. That was answer enough. By evening, the tension flared again. Mark slammed a cupboard harder than necessary. "We can't keep delaying forever," he snapped. Claire's voice sharpened. "It's not your decision alone." Their argument carried down the hall, echoing off the photographs of birthdays and holidays. For years, those pictures had shown unity. Tonight, they bore witness to fracture. I retreated to my study, recording everything on my yellow pad. Dates, words, tones, not just for evidence, but for myself. To remember that this battle was not just legal, it was human, raw, and painful. The crack in their alliance was growing, and through it I began to see a path. Argument had cracked the shell. What came next shattered it. That evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Claire slipped quietly into my study. She closed the door behind her, her eyes darting toward the hallway as if afraid to be seen. "Dad," she whispered, "can I ask you something? And please tell me the truth." Her voice carried both fear and hope, the fragile mixture of a daughter torn between love and loyalty. I gestured for her to sit. She perched on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tight. "Mark says you've been forgetting things. Sarah too. They say you need help with decisions." She swallowed. "Are they right?" I felt the weight of the question. If I answered defensively, it might sound like denial. If I admitted weakness, it could become a weapon against me. So I did what I always taught my children: tell the truth, but tell it whole. "I've forgotten small things," I said softly. "A number here, a light switch there. But memory doesn't vanish overnight, Claire. Not like they're saying. I still know who I am, I still know who you are, and I still know when someone is trying to take what isn't theirs." Her eyes glistened. She looked down, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "I saw the draft, Dad," she whispered. "I didn't know it would be like that. They told me it was just a protection. But those words, diminished capacity, it felt wrong." I reached across the desk, placing my hand gently over hers. "Because it is wrong, and you know it." For a long moment she sat in silence, then she drew a shaky breath. "Mark keeps saying it's for the best, that we need to secure things before it's too late." Her voice cracked on the last words. "Too late for what?" I asked. She met my gaze, tears welling. "Too late for you to remember enough to fight back." The admission hung in the air, heavy as stone. Minute whist, I slid open the drawer of my desk and pulled out the yellow pad. I turned it toward her, showing the careful notes, the dates, the evidence I had gathered. Then I opened my phone, pressing play on Sarah's recorded voice. "Remind me to bring the notary Friday morning." Claire's eyes widened. She covered her mouth with her hand as if the sound itself burned. "Dad, you kept all this?" "Yes," I said. "Because one day someone would need to see the truth, and that someone is you." She rose from her chair, pacing the small study, arms wrapped around herself. "I don't know what to do. He's my husband, but you're my father." I stood slowly, my hand steady on her shoulder. "You don't have to choose tonight, but sooner or later the truth demands loyalty." She nodded, silent tears running down her cheeks. The door creaked suddenly. We both turned. Mark stood in the hallway, his silhouette sharp against the dim light. His eyes flicked from my yellow pad to Claire's tear-streaked face. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, voice too calm, too controlled. Claire wiped her face quickly. "We're fine," but her voice trembled, betraying her. Mark's eyes lingered on me, then on the pad before he forced a smile. "Good, don't stay up too late." He closed the door gently, but the echo of suspicion remained long after his footsteps faded. Claire looked at me, panic in her eyes. "He knows we talked." I squeezed her hand. "Let him know, doubt works both ways." For the first time she managed a weak smile through her tears. That night I lay awake, hearing the faint sounds of the house settling. The lines had been drawn, not on paper, but in hearts. Claire was wavering, pulled between love for her husband and love for her father. The mid-twist was clear. The family I had built was now divided against itself, and in that division lay both danger and hope. By Saturday morning, the air in the house felt sharper than the October wind outside. Conversations turned clipped, footsteps heavier. Even the clatter of dishes seemed louder, as though the walls themselves were bracing for what was coming. Mark avoided my eyes at breakfast, speaking only to Claire or Ethan. Claire, for her part, kept answers short, her voice steady but distant. Something had shifted between them, and though Mark pretended otherwise, he knew it. I sat quietly, buttering my toast, letting the silence stretch. In my working years, silence had often been my tool. People rushed to fill it, and in that rush they reveal themselves. Sure enough, Mark broke first. "Dad," he said suddenly, setting down his fork, "about yesterday, maybe it came across wrong. We weren't trying to pressure you, just planning ahead." Claire stiffened beside him. "Planning ahead," she echoed, her voice edged. Mark forced a smile. "You know what I mean. Nobody lives forever." The words landed heavy like a stone in water. I sipped my coffee calm. "That's true, but I'm still here now." Claire glanced at me, then back at her husband. "And that means he decides, not you, not Sarah." Mark's jaw tightened. He pushed his plate away, appetite gone. Later that afternoon, I overheard them in the living room. Mark's voice low but strained, Claire's trembling but firm. "You're undermining me in front of him," Mark hissed. "I'm standing up for my father," she shot back. "You don't understand, he's slipping." "No," she said, her voice rising. "He's not. I saw his notes, I heard the recordings. You're the one hiding things." The words cut through the walls. My chest swelled with both pride and dread. Pride in my daughter's courage, dread at the storm her courage would summon. Minute whist came that evening. Sarah cornered me in the hallway, her smile thin as paper. "You've been busy lately, haven't you?" Her eyes flicked toward my study, where the yellow pad lay hidden in its drawer. "Whatever you're scribbling down, just remember, it won't hold up in court. People believe what they want to believe, and right now they believe you're fading." Her words were venom wrapped in honey. I met her gaze, calm. "Sometimes believing isn't enough. Sometimes you need proof." For the first time, her smile slipped. Just a fraction, but enough. That night, the tension broke into something louder. I was in my room when shouting erupted downstairs. Claire's voice rang clear. "I won't let you push him, Mark, not anymore." Then Mark's reply, sharp. "He's old, Claire, he doesn't even realize what's best for him." I opened my door quietly, listening. Their argument spilled through the house, raw and unguarded. Ethan came out of his room, eyes wide. I placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering, "It's just words, son, go back to bed." He obeyed, though fear lingered in his eyes. Later, when the shouting subsided, Claire came to me, her face pale, her hands trembling. "I told him," she whispered. "I told him I won't sign anything, won't support anything unless you say so. He's furious, Dad. He says I'm betraying him." I held her hand gently. Truth feels like betrayal to those living on lies. She cried softly against my shoulder, and I knew the line had been crossed. No longer doubt, no longer hesitation. She had chosen. But choices have consequences. As I tucked my yellow pad back into the drawer that night, I couldn't shake the look in Mark's eyes, the simmering anger that had grown sharper by the hour. The confrontation had begun. What worried me wasn't what had been said, but what would come next, when words no longer felt enough for them. By Sunday, the house no longer felt like home. It felt like a chessboard. Every glance was a move, every silence a strategy. Mark barely spoke to me, his jaw tight, footsteps heavy. Sarah busied herself with chores she had never cared for before, sorting mail, tidying drawers, hovering near the kitchen counter where I kept bills and receipts. Claire kept close to me, her presence steady but tense, as if she expected sparks at any moment. Even Ethan noticed. "Why's everyone so serious?" he asked at breakfast, his small voice cutting through the silence. None of us answered. The first desperate move came before noon. I was in my study when Sarah appeared with a sheet of paper in hand. She smiled sweetly. "Dad, I found this old form mixed in with the bills. Mind signing it so I can file it properly?" I took the paper. It looked simple, utilities perhaps, but the bottom line carried a blank labeled signature of owner. "Bill is this?" I asked, letting my voice stay casual. Her eyes flickered. "Oh, just an old service form, nothing important." I held her gaze. "Then it doesn't need my signature." Her smile faltered. "Dad," I set the paper on the desk, folded my hands over it, and said nothing more. After a long silence, she took it back, lips pressed thin. That evening, Mark tried his own approach. We sat in the living room, the TV on but muted. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Dad, you've always trusted me, haven't you?" "I've trusted many people," I replied. He forced a laugh. "Fair enough. But listen, I can help you manage things, take the stress off. One signature and I can handle the bank, the bills, everything. You won't have to worry." The offer sounded generous, but beneath it lay the snare, power of attorney. I shook my head slowly. "Worry keeps a man alive." His smile stiffened. "Sometimes it also drives a man into mistakes." The words lingered like a threat disguised as wisdom. Minute twist came the next morning. I checked the Alexa app as I had each day. A new reminder had been recorded, Sarah's voice again. "Call the notary, ask about emergency signing." Emergency signing. They weren't just pushing. They were escalating. I saved the clip, heart pounding, and added it to my growing file. Each line they spoke in secret became another weapon I could use when the moment came. But desperation makes people sloppy. That afternoon, I caught Mark rifling through my desk drawer. He straightened quickly when he saw me, holding a pen like it explained his presence. "Just looking for a stamp," he said too quickly. I said nothing, only watched. The silence pressed on him until he muttered, "Don't look at me like that." He left the study, but I noticed his eyes lingered on the locked drawer where my yellow pad rested. He knew I was keeping something. He just didn't know how much. That night, Claire confronted him openly in the kitchen. "I won't let you corner him," she said, her voice clear enough for me to hear from down the hall. Mark's reply was sharp, stripped of patience. "Then you're choosing him over me." Her silence said everything. I lay in bed later, the shadows of the room heavy around me. The confrontation had shifted. Persuasion had failed. Pressure had failed. Now they were reaching for desperation, quick signatures, emergency plans, searching my things. And desperation, I knew, was the most dangerous stage. It happened on a Tuesday night. The kind of night when the house should have been wrapped in peace, rain tapping the windows, the hum of the furnace steady, Ethan asleep upstairs. But peace had long since left these walls. I was in bed, lights off, pretending to drift when I heard it, the faint creak of floorboards outside my door. The careful kind of footsteps, measured, testing for sound. Not Claire's light tread, not Ethan's shuffle, heavier. Mark. The doorknob turned slowly. I kept my breathing even, my eyes half closed. The door opened a crack, spilling a sliver of hallway light into the room. Mark slipped inside, Sarah close behind him, a folder in her hand. "He's asleep," Sarah whispered. Mark nodded. "We'll do it now. Do it now." The words chilled me more than the draft from the open door. Sarah laid the folder on my desk, flipping to the marked page. "One signature," she murmured. "He won't even know by morning." Mark approached my bedside with a pen in hand. "All we need is his hand on the line. Guide it if we have to." My pulse hammered, but I forced my chest to rise and fall slowly as though lost in sleep. He leaned over me, close enough that I could smell the sharp tang of whiskey on his breath. Minute whist. Just as he reached for my hand, Claire's voice pierced the room. "What are you doing?" The doorway blazed with her silhouette, robe tied tight, eyes fierce. She must have heard them on the stairs. Mark froze, the pen inches from my fingers. Sarah's face drained of color. "Claire," Mark said quickly, "we were just what?" She snapped. "Forging his will in the middle of the night. Her words rang like thunder. For the first time, they weren't whispers, they were accusations, raw and clear. I opened my eyes slowly, sitting up. "I was wondering how far you'd go," I said, my voice calm but sharp. Mark stepped back, panic flickering in his eyes. "You don't understand, it's for your own protection." "Protection doesn't come with whiskey breath and midnight signatures," I replied. Sarah tried to interject, but Claire cut her off. "Enough, I heard everything. I won't let you use my father like this." The air between us felt electric, each word another spark. For a moment no one moved. Then Mark slammed the pen onto the desk. "Fine. If he wants to play stubborn, let him. But don't come crying when everything falls apart." His words carried more than frustration. They carried threat. He stormed from the room, Sarah trailing behind, muttering curses under her breath. The folder remained on the desk, the page still open, the empty signature line staring like a wound. Claire sank into the chair beside me, her hands trembling. "I thought I could reason with him," she whispered. "But he's gone too far." I placed my hand over hers. "You chose, Claire, that's what matters now." Her tears spilled then, silent but fierce. After she left, I locked the folder in my desk drawer, sliding the key into my pocket. I also checked the voice recorder still clipped beneath my shirt. The blinking red light reassured me everything had been captured. Their whispers, their attempt, Claire's confrontation, evidence. But lying in bed after the storm passed, I knew the fight was not over. If anything, it had only just begun. Mark's pride had cracked, Sarah's patience snapped. People who feel exposed grow desperate, and desperation, I knew, doesn't retreat quietly. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that makes even birds fall silent. It matched the weight in my chest. Mark and Sarah had crossed the line in the dark, and I knew daylight would not stop them. Desperation never sleeps. At breakfast, the air felt brittle. Claire buttered toast without tasting it, her eyes downcast. Ethan tapped his spoon against his bowl, oblivious to the storm building above him. Mark sat rigid, jaw tight, while Sarah avoided my gaze entirely. I ate slowly, carefully, letting silence press in. Then, when the last dishes were cleared, I said it. "I'd like us all in the living room now." Mark scoffed. "Really? Another family meeting?" "Yes," I replied evenly. "This one will matter." Something in my tone made even Sarah freeze. Reluctantly, they followed. I settled into my armchair, the yellow pad balanced on my lap. Claire stood behind me, hands clasped. Ethan sat cross-legged on the rug, sensing enough to stay quiet. I took a deep breath. For weeks I've been patient. I've watched, listened, and gathered. But last night was the breaking point, so here's the truth. From my pocket I pulled the voice recorder. I pressed play. At once the room filled with Sarah's whisper. "One signature, he won't even know by morning." Then Mark's voice, "Do it now." The sound cut like a blade. Claire's eyes welled, but she stayed silent. Ethan looked from face to face, confused but tense. Mark shot forward. "Turn that off." I held up a hand. "No, everyone hears it." The recording played on. Claire's confrontation, my calm reply, their panic. When it ended, silence clung to the walls like smoke. Mid-twist, Sarah tried to twist the narrative. "That's not what it sounds like," she said quickly. "We were." "Don't," Claire cut in, her voice sharp. "I was there, I heard it, I saw it." Sarah faltered, words dying in her throat. Mark's face flushed red. "So what? An old man with a tape recorder thinks he's clever. None of this will hold up." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "It's not just the recording, it's the altered will in your folder, the bank statements rerouted here, the Alexa reminders, every thread woven together. You left a trail of greed so clear even Ethan could follow it." For the first time, Mark's confidence cracked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Claire stepped forward. "You were going to rob my father, and you dragged Sarah into it." Sarah turned on him. "Dragged me? This was your plan from the start. I told you he wouldn't notice." Her words hung in the air, a confession wrapped in accusation. Ethan's small voice broke the moment. "Mom." Sarah froze, realizing her son had just heard everything. The room collapsed into chaos. Sarah pleading, Mark raging, Claire crying, Ethan asking questions no child should ask. I sat still, waiting like a fisherman holding steady until the line goes taut. Then I spoke, low but firm. "Enough." They stopped. You thought I was blind, but I see you. You thought I was weak, but I planned for this moment, and now you will leave this house." Mark bristled. "You can't throw us out." "Yes," I said, standing, "because this is still my home, my name on the deed, my signature on the will, the real will, and I have every word, every lie recorded." Minute whisked two. Claire stepped forward, holding her phone. "I already called the lawyer," she said. "He has the files. If you don't leave now, the police will be next." Mark looked at her as though betrayed anew. "Your own husband." "My mistake," she said coldly, "one I'm correcting." Sarah's shoulders sagged. For the first time she looked less like a co-conspirator and more like a daughter realizing her choices had shattered everything. She whispered, "Dad, I don't know why." I raised a hand. "Don't. I've heard enough." Mark grabbed his jacket, muttering curses, but his bravado had bled away. Sarah lingered, tears streaking her face, then followed him out the door. Their footsteps faded, the slam of the car door echoing like a final verdict. The house fell quiet again. Claire collapsed onto the couch, trembling. Ethan climbed into her lap, clinging tight. I lowered myself back into my chair, the weight of everything pressing down. It was over. For now. But as I watched the rain streak down the window, I knew the ending was more complicated. Sarah was still my daughter. Ethan was still my grandson. And wounds this deep do not close overnight. Yet there was justice, and sometimes justice must come before healing. The rain had stopped by morning. Dew clung to the grass, each drop reflecting pale light as though the earth itself had been rinsed clean. Inside, the house was quiet in a way I hadn't heard in weeks. No whispers behind doors. No footsteps creeping in the night. Just peace, fragile, tentative, but real. Claire made breakfast, moving carefully, as though afraid sound might shatter the calm. Ethan sat at the table with a coloring book, his small hand smudging crayon lines into a sun that stretched too wide across the page. He looked up and said, "It's brighter now." Maybe he meant the drawing, maybe he meant the house. Sarah and Mark were gone. Their departure had left behind a vacuum, not just silence, but absence. Family is like that. Even when they wound you, they're leaving still echoes. I found Sarah's coffee cup still in the sink, lipstick faint on the rim. For a moment, I stared at it longer than I should have. She was my daughter. The same girl I had taught to ride a bike who once begged me to check under her bed for monsters. Last night she became the monster, and yet she was still my child. I rinsed the cup and put it away. That was all I could do for now. After breakfast, Claire sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her eyes were swollen, but her voice carried new steel. "Dad," she said, "I'll take care of Ethan. We'll manage, even if it's hard." I nodded. "You already have. Last night you showed more courage than most." Tears welled, but she smiled faintly. "You taught me that." Later, I gathered the evidence, recordings, altered papers, the yellow pad with my careful notes, and locked them in the safe. Not for revenge, for protection, because people like Mark don't disappear quietly, and because forgiveness doesn't erase the need for boundaries. Minute whisked. That afternoon, Sarah returned alone. Oh, Mark, no bluster. Just Sarah, shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed red. She stood on the porch, not daring to knock. Through the glass, I saw her mouth form a single word, "Sorry." Claire bristled, ready to shut the door, but I lifted a hand. Sarah looked at me, then at Ethan, who peeked out from behind the curtain. Their eyes met, and she broke down completely. "Not today," I said softly, almost to myself. "Not yet." I closed the curtain, leaving her on the porch. It wasn't final, but it was firm. Some doors can't be opened until trust grows back, or maybe never at all. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply. No listening for footsteps, no pretending weakness, only the steady rhythm of rain returning, cleansing the air. When I woke, sunlight cut sharp across the floor, and I felt something I hadn't in weeks: safety. Ethan climbed onto my lap at breakfast, clutching his too-wide son drawing. "Grandpa," he said, "this is for you. You keep the house bright." I held him close, breathing in the innocence of crayons and child's trust. Perhaps that was the truest inheritance. Not money, not deeds, but the faith of a grandchild who still believed you could keep monsters away. Looking back, betrayal has a peculiar weight. It presses on your chest, steals your breath. But sometimes it also clarifies, sharpening what matters. The bonds worth guarding, the people worth fighting for. Mark thought I was just an old man. Sarah thought I was too trusting. They were both wrong. I was still a father. And fathers, when pushed, defend with more than strength. They defend with love sharpened into resolve. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. These aren't easy tales to tell, but they matter, because they remind us that even in betrayal, truth can shine through. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you faced betrayal and found your own way to fight back? I'd love to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories of family, justice, and resilience, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Every click helps keep these stories alive. Because sometimes the best justice is simply telling the story and letting others know they are not alone.